Hello again, everybody. It is I, Nick Pennsylvania, here as ever with my good friend Brendan Bond.
Hey, everybody.
It's a wild time to be alive, not only because there's just so much going on historic, but there are so many great mysteries that are finally starting to see some conclusions. Not the entire mystery being solved, but case in point, we are recording this on the very day, in fact, just a few hours after the Philadelphia police announced that they had finally identified the boy in the box, the America's Unknown Child. And in fact, our other little thing, Dr. Pennsylvania, our most popular episode deals with just our identifying and going through the history of the boy in the box. And he was identified, as you might expect, through DNA. Earlier, in the past couple years, the Golden State Killer has also been identified through DNA and through genealogy programs. And today is no different. Earlier this year, it was announced that the Somerton Man had been positively identified. And even though we now know a great deal of his story, there are still some mysteries, which I'll get into in a little bit. I know Brendan Bond has been enamored with this and has looked into this mystery quite a bit, going so far as to write a song about it, which is really not normal behavior. But I have asked him very politely not to look into this because I really wanted to get his reactions as much as yours if you are hearing this for the first time. The Somerton Man, sometimes known as the Tamal Should case, sometimes the Mystery Man of Adelaide, he has been identified after 65 years, 1948 to 2002, so 70 some years, really. So I'm going to be quiet for a little bit. I'm going to hand things over to Bond just to kind of give everybody some of the history and some of the lore of the Somerton Man.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So I'm going to preface this by saying two things. One, like Nick mentioned, I did write a song about this years ago. That's when I did like a lot of research and really kind of like fell down the rabbit hole that a lot of other researchers have on this case. And it has been covered on other podcasts and TV shows and mentioned in movies and other places in pop culture because it is such a big mystery, especially in that part of the world. And as I get into some of the elements of it, I think you'll understand why. This case, again, was from 1948. I believe this early December. I want to say it was like December 1st was when he was found. Was when see my memory is pretty good. When he was found, and when we say he, we mean a gentleman. This takes place in Somerton Park, which is either in or right outside of Adelaide, Australia, which is in like the southwestern kind of province. And he was found propped up or sitting against a wall, like a seawall in this park, like on like a beach. People had noticed him there for a while. And then like, again, the morning of the 1st or whatever, someone went up to check on him and realized he was dead, called the authorities.
Yeah, there was some jockeys actually training on the beach with their horses.
Yes. For some reason in my head I was thinking like, were they polo players? But that didn't make sense. Jockeys makes a whole lot more sense. So if you guys hear anything that is corrected, I get it. But so the guy, as with most cases, whenever you find a body, the police immediately looked for identification. Didn't have any. But he did have quite a few other items on his person that they were hoping would lead to identifying him. Now, the most famous piece that this guy had on him is what Nick mentioned earlier, the Tamad Shalud, or I believe that's how it's pronounced. I believe it's Persian. It's from a 12th. It was a little piece of paper that just had these Persian words on it. And it translates to, I believe, it is finished, or it's over, or it signifies some sort of finality, which if you're a police officer, you're like, this is this is a clue one way or the other. And they were originally not sure if it was foul play, not sure if it was suicide. The guy didn't have like a gunshot wound or wasn't strangled. There's no signs of a struggle or anything. And whenever the police started to question people, there were folks that even the day before, I believe, saw him on the beach in that same location. But many of these witnesses say that they had seen him moving his arms, shifting, or I believe one group saw him possibly lying down and then later saw him sitting up. So it appears that he was alive the day before in that position, that he was later found. Then as they start to comb out and start to look for different things, I believe when they put in the paper that he had these words on it, they connected it to, I can't remember the poet's name, but it was a 12th or 13th century Persian book of poetry.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm looking it up right now because I can never remember. It comes from the Rubaiyat of Omar. I think it's Khayyam, but the Rubaiyat.
That sounds right.
Seriously well-known book.
I guess, people heard that going, oh, that's what this book is from. And then the police, if I remember correctly, because this is where things start to get kind of like, things are already getting weird, but they keep getting weirder. The actual book that the text was ripped out from was given to the police by an informant who was never later named, if I remember correctly. And the book that had this little piece at the very end of this one poem torn out had two other very interesting things in the back of the book. Now I'm going to get to that later because that's kind of like where the fun really starts. Around the same period of time, within a few days after, they also were able to find a few things out about this guy. They said that he appeared to be British or British, Irish, Scottish, Welsh. They thought he was from the UK by how he looked, but his clothes that he was wearing, they said they thought were American. They were able to track down his suitcase, a suitcase that was left in a train station. I believe it was a train or a bus station, and in that there were other articles of clothing that they were able to match to this guy to say, okay, this is definitely this dude's briefcase. Some of the other interesting articles before we get back to the book that I remember just like from like a writing standpoint, as I'm writing the song, I thought were interesting. He had a pack of cigarettes on him that had the cigarettes that were in the pack were different than the pack itself, which is just like an odd thing. He then had some matches. There were names that were sewn into some of the articles of clothing, but
name
not
was Keane.
Keane, yes.
And that didn't lead to any.
There was no missing people in any, I guess, British Commonwealth or America where there's no missing man named Keane. There was thread. There was some kind of orange thread that was like very specific to some sort of work. I can't remember what it was, but I was like, oh, this is a clue kind of thing. The book, getting back to the book had two things in it. It had what appeared to be a code. It was a series of letters that appeared to, kind of like need a cipher to decode. Additionally, there was a telephone number and the name of a local woman who was, I believe her house was like within a mile of where this guy was found.
Yeah, about 5 minutes walking is what the police said.
Okay, yeah.
A young nurse.
Yeah, a young nurse. And when she was initially questioned, apparently she was dismissive of it, said she didn't know him, had no idea why her name would be in this book. But I remember whenever she was shown the guy's likeness after he had passed and they had found him and everything, I remember at least one newspaper or reporter saying that she appeared like visibly shaken kind of thing. And the police did believe that she was being deceptive around knowing this man's identity. When they went through the autopsy, they did find some like interesting things, I guess. Like I remember his spleen was enlarged. There was a few other things that indicated there may have been some sort of drugs in his system, like some kind of poison, but nothing overt. So they couldn't tell if he was poisoned either intentionally or if it was suicide. So they still kind of like really didn't know. As a result of all these things coming out in the first like few weeks, the thing that a lot of people thought was, given this is in 1948, people were thinking this guy was a spy because he had a code in a book. He was unknown to people in the area, appeared to be from out of town, but appeared to be, intelligent, strong. Although it wasn't like he was sick or anything. Didn't seem like he was like it wasn't just like a vagrant or anything like that. He seemed to be a professional, well taken care of and healthy otherwise, with no clear cause of death or reason why he ended up where he ended up. Now, there were a lot of people who tried to decipher the code in the back of this book, but I don't think anyone ever came up with anything that was satisfactory. From basically what I could find, everything from there on out is just kind of always thought it sounded a lot like a DB Cooper case over here in America, where people were just fascinated by it. I think a lot of it because of the time, the fact that like spycraft was something that was just kind of taking off in like the zeitgeist. It should have a resolution, and when it doesn't, I think people, like anything else, come up with ideas and captured people's imaginations from not only Australia, but all over the world, myself included. And up until a few years ago, that was kind of my understanding of it. Now, Nick was the one who let me know that there was some testing done. I'm not sure what that leads to, but I'm excited to learn along with you guys whatever updates they have for us.
Okay. So yes, and his identity is now known, and unfortunately, I'm gonna walk you to it. I'm not gonna give everything away here in the beginning, but it's not a happy story, and a lot of the rumors and the internet ideas out there. I shouldn't say internet ideas because there's really nothing that has been discussed in the internet age that hadn't already kind of been postulated about this man and this mystery. But let's pick up kind of where you left off, which is this phone number of this woman who was about a 5-minute walk away from the beach, the Somerton Park beach where this man was found. There is an electronic engineer professor at the University of Adelaide, or Adelaide University. I don't know what they call it. I do know they are states in Australia, not provinces. That is one thing I do know. The bottom line is he was following up on this. He became really interested in this case at some point. He hadn't really known about it until the 2000s. And his thing was, got to follow up on this Jo Thompson. She was a young nurse in 1948, and her phone number was in this man's pocket. Unfortunately, she had died a couple years before this Dr. Derek Abbott got so invested in this. He reached out to the granddaughter because he figured, maybe what I can do is meet this granddaughter, explain the situation, this whole story, this whole mystery to her, and then maybe with her allowing it, can get some DNA samples, and if I'm able to get DNA from the Somerton Man, maybe we can start to solve this mystery of who this man is, because a lot of people, and I think this is probably the prevailing theory, was thinking that this man and this woman had some relationship, and maybe it produced a child, and who knows why it ended the way it did, but there it is. Now, I will skip ahead a little bit and say that this woman, the granddaughter of Jo Thompson, not related to the Somerton Man. However, she is now related through marriage to Dr. Derek Abbott. The two of them married. It's a pretty wild story. Australia ABC had a little documentary about this mystery and their lives together, in fact.
Aw.
Yeah, pretty cool.
I'm glad, good for them. Good for them.
So anyway, so he was exploring DNA, and he went to, before they interred Mr. X, the Somerton Man, the police had a taxidermist make a plaster cast of the Somerton Man.
I remember seeing that. Yeah.
And in that cast, hairs were trapped because when they pulled it off, hairs from the body came off with it and are stuck in that cast. So Professor Abbott, one of the ways he was trying to extract DNA from those hair samples. But at the time, he really wasn't able to. This would have been about 2015 to 2017. He did end up getting in touch with Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, who is an expert in the U.S. in forensic genealogy. So as DNA continues to improve, they actually were able to get enough DNA from those hairs because they had gotten enough interest that the body was dug up again so they could get potential DNA samples from, say, the teeth or bone. However, Dr. Abbott wasn't able to be involved in that. The police in Adelaide are involved in that. He had to go back to the hairs that he was working with. So they were able ultimately, again, through improvements in DNA, to be able to get enough DNA evidence that they could submit it through these genealogical databases. So they uploaded it to this database and they found a living relative. And then they went through, it was another man in the state of Victoria, and they went through that man's family, building a family tree, identifying descendants. At one point, they had roughly 4,000 individuals that they had to narrow through. So the first things they're looking for a man. They're looking for one where there is no death date recorded. And they are looking for a man born around 1905. And anybody attached potentially to the surname Keene, because as you mentioned, the Keene name was found on a tie and maybe some other clothing. The clothing itself the tags were taken out of it, which people are acting like that's a mystery, but that's something I do too. I can't fully explain why. Bottom line was...
They're itchy.
Yeah, there is that. And as you know, I don't like wearing anything that really advertises anything, so I think tags are part of that. But bottom line is, they identified somebody that they felt held strong potential. It was a man named Charles Webb, who had been born in 1905, and he was the first cousin 3 times removed of the man that they had identified as a living relative. And they continue to, find other living relatives as well, but they started digging into this Charles Webb. And they received confirmation through running the DNA against closer relatives yet. So he's not a spy, and he's not a foreign national. He was born in 1905 in a place called Footscray in the state of Victoria. This is just west of Melbourne, okay? Which is 730 kilometers away from Adelaide, or about 450 miles, give or take a few miles. So a good ways from Adelaide. But he grew up in a neighborhood called Springvale, which is to the east of Melbourne, kind of southeast of Melbourne. His family had a bakery. He was one of 6 children, and he played football, community football, soccer. This is one of those confusing things that has nothing to do with the story. I'm pretty sure that Australians call soccer, and then they have something else they call football.
They have like Australian rules rugby, which I think is like what they call their football. Yeah.
Okay. In the Australian things I was reading and watching, They called it football, so I'm going to assume it's Australian rules football, because Canada, the United States, I believe South Africa, and Australia call football soccer. So, okay, culture lesson. Anyway, so he grows up in Springville. Family has a bakery. He plays Australian rules football. We're being definitive about that. He becomes a maker of electric instruments, not musical instruments, but other radios and such. He has a close brother, and he marries a woman, Dorothy, in 1941. And things are rocky. There's not a lot to be sure of like what's going on exactly, but he's married in 41 and he's dead by 48. In those years, both of his parents die. The brother with whom he was close with dies. And he's moody, and his wife describes him as being threatening and occasionally violent. One incident is charted where he had some people, they were playing cards in the house, and he threatened that person with a knife after he had lost some money. She says that he would often, day after day after day, retire to bed at like 7 p.m. So he doesn't seem like a very happy guy. He didn't have very many friends in his adult life. He wrote a lot of poems, a lot of them dealing with death, according to what the family has found. And he tried to kill himself at least one occasion. His wife, Dorothy, came home. I believe this is in 46. And the whole house, according to her, smelled of ether. And he claimed to have swallowed some 50 tablets. Not sure of what, but Dorothy found him in the bed. He ends up leaving in April of 1947, leaves her in 1947. She gets a divorce in 1951, I believe the papers said. But of course, by that time, he had been dead for the better part of 3 years. So she figures, I'm assuming that he just left. No one really knows what he did. So you got April of 1947 to December 1st of 1948, a little over a year and a half, where he's just really kind of unaccounted for. The bottom line is it's almost certainly a suicide. There's some attempts. There's at least one documented attempt before. There are a lot of circumstantial, emotional evidence that would suggest that he's not in the best place. And it sounds like he may have just kicked about for, again, the better part of a year and a half. Doing what? Who knows? But when he dies, his close brother isn't there. I don't know about the other siblings. His parents are gone, and he's estranged from his wife. And I don't know if she was looking for him, and that's one of the things I'm curious about is, was she aware? Because this was a fairly big story. It's one of those things I wonder, and we've talked about this before, when it actually happened, how big was the news nationally? It's certainly, the television was around in 48. I don't think many Australians had them. And we certainly didn't have the 24-hour news cycle in 1948 like what we do now. I think this is one of those occasions where there's an incident, and the size of the incident has grown over the years, because to the police, it didn't seem like anybody came forward to claim this gentleman. He is related to the Keene family as well, because there are photos of him as a young man the family has brought out, and there are photos of a large family gathering, and on the back of the photo it's labeled, and he's actually goofing around with a man named Keene. And one of the profoundly sad things that I see is when I look at these photos of him in the 1920s, he's joking around, he's smiling and everything. And then we know so much about the autopsy photos, the police photos, and to learn about how he was living in the time after the 1920s. It's very sad, and reading all of this these past couple days has really kind of, it's made me very sad. So all the sexy spy stuff, unfortunately, this is just a very mundane thing. The things yet remain to be answered, though, are why was he in Adelaide? Was he just kicking about? Was he trying to establish himself? Was he just saying goodbye to things? Why was that young lady's number on his person? I'm assuming they had some sort of communication at some point. I don't think it was for very long, though, because my personal thought is he wasn't in Adelaide for very long at all before December 1st, 1948, the morning of, when his body's found by a couple jockeys out practicing on the beach. So that is what we know. That's the public information. I'm curious as to your initial impressions after all these years.
Unfortunately, not surprised that it's not like a lot of things in life. We would love it to be the romantic spycraft, James Bond, soldier, soldier, tinker, tailor, spy type stuff. But it's not. It's unfortunately, I think the Occam's razor would have always pointed to suicide in this case. That's sad. I mean, the guy obviously had a lot of problems and had a lot of hurt in his life that he wasn't able to get help for one reason or another. And, that's not his fault. So it's sad. It really is sad. And I hope that, not to inject a paranormal element where there doesn't need to be. I hope that if any good comes from this, it is that maybe this guy can find some rest now, and maybe it raises a little bit of awareness just for mental health across the board. That's a really sad thing.
Yeah, I'm reminded of when our friend Brian was on, and we were talking about if you're feeling depressed and everything, what are some things you can do, and it does make me think about that conversation we had. Yeah, kind of a little bit of a downer there, but I mean, his name was Charles Webb, and we know he had happy days, and we know he had mundane days. And if there's anything to take, is that if there's any one last thing, is that, well, maybe at the end, even though he was going through all this, and this is almost certainly what happened, maybe he set some things into motion so that he could confuse people for a while and do something squirrely like that. And I guess maybe there's something to that, because that's another thing. Like, the poem makes sense in that in this context too, and why he would tear this piece off and throw the rest of the book into an open window of a vehicle. The code, that cipher, it doesn't answer that. Could that be just something that he did kind of as a goof? I don't know.
You're right. You're right that's like one of the big unanswered questions is we know who he is now, or like I said, almost certainly suicide was the culprit here, but it doesn't answer all the questions. But so rarely do we get all the answers. So in this case, it's unfulfilling in more ways than one, unfortunately. But again, like we talk about a lot with a lot of things, both in the paranormal and in life, often it is the mundane. It is the normal. It's not the sexy, romantic answer. It'll be interesting to see how folks continue to keep this story alive going forward, because you're right, there are still unanswered questions. And I think that this story has been around long enough people have talked about it, that we said kind of made its way into the cultural zeitgeist a little bit. Now the folklore of it is going to change, and it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like going forward.
Yeah, to me, this is one of the mysteries where it's not a why. This is a mystery of a who, and a lot of times these who mysteries are going to be solved, especially with not only just DNA becoming a forensic tool in the past 40 years, but just as it continues to be improved upon, and as these genealogical sites and databases continue to expand with people submitting their DNA, it's going to unravel a lot of mysteries. I already mentioned the Golden State Killer. I already mentioned that, again, just today, the Philadelphia police announced the identity of the boy formerly known as America's Unknown Child, or the boy in the box. And now the Somerton Man it's no longer the Somerton Man. He is Mr. Charles Webb. And, that's important. A lot of times I associate this story with the lead glasses story of South America, and you had mentioned D.B. Cooper as well. Mm-hmm. I think there will come a time where sooner than later, we'll be able to definitively say who D.B. Cooper was. We already know who the two men who died on the hillside of the iron or the lead masks were down in South America. What we don't know is the why. Right. And the why mysteries are always going to be the most difficult to resolve, because we like to think that people are always rational, but sometimes no.
Absolutely. No, I think that's an excellent point. Along with that, there are this is again another example where even if, for DB Cooper, let's say someone is able to test the fibers on that tie or that cigarette butt or whatever, we definitively can find out who he is. There's still a lot of unanswered questions around that.
Yeah, that's one of those mysteries that I definitely want to know, because there's a part of me that appreciates D.B. Cooper. It's definitely not the best part of me, but it is that.
Well, yeah. Well, I think it's kind of that modern cowboy thing, right?
And the gall right. to do it.
Yeah, it's complicated, but I think that's exactly why that story in general has captivated so many people over the years. And again, with the Somerton Man, I hope that the story does stay alive. I hope the story does go on. I hope it does change along with the times. And I think that we're lucky enough to live in a time where, like you said, we're going to see more and more of this happening, where the who element does get figured out quite often. But the last thing I want to say tonight before we sign off is, just because we've talked about suicide so much tonight, if you or someone you know is going through something, go get help. 988 is the National Suicide Hotline.